Woohoo!
So to begin our series of breaking down consciousness into its constituent components, I want to start with something that seems most basic, and that is our sensory perceptions. Taking a closer look at our senses and how they relate to consciousness. We hear. What does hearing feel like?
Hearing is different than seeing, but I think it's the most similar of our senses. I would describe it as like the second way of perceiving the world, like coming after seeing. And in that same way, it gives you information about what's going on in the world that sometimes seeing can't give you. Like if someone's doing construction right near you.
We're going to talk about the differences. That's my next question. Focus on the question I have right now. Okay. What does hearing feel like?
I don't know.
It's a hard thing to answer. Well, one thing that I would, say that, and it's very similar to seeing, is it's highly spatial.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's a sense of space as you hear things.
Yeah, you can hear...
It's three-dimensional.
Hearing is, what I said, it's your secondary form of perceiving the world. And you can hear things from far away, you can hear things from close up, even though it's a little bit more limited than seeing is.
Let's talk about how hearing is different than our other senses.
Yeah.
We talked about, the first thing you mentioned about seeing is that you can turn it on and off by closing your eyes.
Yeah.
What about hearing?
Unfortunately, you cannot. You can try to, muffle the sounds you hear by, closing your ears, or, putting your hands over them. But that's more of, an outer way of trying to get rid of it. You can't actually go into your ears. And there's no, thing of, eyelids. They're very complete. You still have light perception, but you have no perception of, anything that's actually going on. But for hearing, you can, reduce it slightly, maybe. But you can't really stop hearing it completely. In a way, even though it's I would describe it as their secondary perception of the world, it's almost like a more complete version of it because you can't just turn it on and off. And unlike seeing, it's omnidirectional. You can hear from any direction. Things that come right up close to your ear are easier to hear than things that are way out there. But you can still hear things from close up, you can still hear things from far away, and you can hear things from every direction because even though you don't have ears on the way that the sound comes at you can come from any direction at all.
So it's omnidirectional rather than unidirectional. What about its bandwidth? Is high bandwidth is seeing, or is it lower bandwidth, or?
I think it's definitely lower bandwidth because even though you can hear multiple things at once, you can't quite do it in the same way you can see things. Because when you're seeing things, I'm seeing hundreds of things right now. I'm seeing a lot of movement. I'm seeing a lot of things. But when I'm hearing, I can only hear a few things at once. I can only really process a few things at once. And even though there's multiple levels to hearing, I can hear my own voice, I can hear the ocean waves, I can hear some sort of conversation that's happening pretty far away from me. I'm only really consciously focusing on one.
Well, but so maybe you mixed a bunch of shit up there, right? You started talking about the consciousness and unconscious part and everything else. But if we're just strictly speaking of bandwidth,
hearing is lower bandwidth than seeing.
Gives you less information. And that's, by the way, empirically true. Video files contain way more information than audio files do.
Yeah.
From an information standpoint, they just have more information.
The computers, they sort of, when they're processing this information, they sort of work similar to our brains. There's just, less going on. It's harder to process the visual stuff than it is the audio stuff.
Another thing that is somewhat interesting about sound is we can produce sound. Whereas, you can kind of say we can produce sight, but not really, right? It's not the same.
Yeah.
You can't consciously decide to start projecting some visual something to another person. Maybe you can charade or pantomime it or something, but I can literally high notes, low notes, medium notes.
And then that's why the main way that we use hearing right now is we use it to communicate with each other.
Right.
We use it to talk. We're talking right now, and we use it to hear. We don't use hearing to talk, but we use it to hear each other. We use it to, the sound waves are our primary focus of communication. And we have, things like sign language for when it comes to, sight for people that are a part of hearing. But most of the time, like talking out loud and like using those sound waves to project to other people's ears, that's the main source of hearing. And so in a way it's similar to what I was talking about before with the conscious versus unconscious feeling of reading when it comes to sight. There's that sort of conscious versus unconscious version of hearing, which it comes to when you're hearing people speak to you. Because when I'm hearing other things, when I'm hearing things that aren't really transferred into language, like just like background noise, I'm processing what that background noise sounds like just in its pure form. But when it's someone speaking to me, I'm not really thinking of exactly how the words sound when they're together, how they like I might think like how high or how low they are, but I'm not thinking about like the actual experience of hearing them. I'm thinking they're just automatically transferred into meaning. And there's that same feeling of reading where you can't read something we can't see something without reading it. You can't really hear language without processing what that language is.
Well, and another aspect of this is since you noted that you can't really turn off your hearing, a lot of hearing is annoying.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it might be our most annoying sense.
One of them, yeah.
Right? Like it's not like I'm like, oh, this visual processing is annoying me right now. Right? Yeah. You're like, oh my God, what? Would you just shut up? Because it is. It's omnidirectional. You can't turn away from it. You can't cover it up. It's annoying. Is all hearing conscious?
No, not all hearing conscious. And I sort of went into it with the language thing, where it's like the conscious versus unconscious processing of the meaning behind the words. But most of the time, when you're hearing something, you're not really like thinking about how you're hearing it. All this background noise that's going on, like all like the ocean waves or whatever, or like all like the million little things that are going on with like the background conversations, I'm not focused on them. I'm not really processing them. Like they're happening, they're going on, but I'm more unconsciously observing them than I am consciously observing them.
This is an interesting point. So let's talk about going from an unconscious hearing state to a conscious hearing state. What context does that happen in?
Well, like, for example, if you're like hearing someone else, like a sort of a conversation.
I'm sorry, if you can just for example, because it's easier than the reading, like just like hearing something and then like all of a sudden like a noise. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to like the reading example, which I think is complicated in terms of like unconscious to conscious. Like like there's all this like noise happening right now, and we're clearly processing it because like if it was like got loud or whatever, it became important. All of a sudden, it become rather than
if you're like just listening to background noise, if you're just listening to things that are going on in the world, like the birds that are chirping, if there's suddenly like something that's really loud, then all of a sudden you're going to be tuned into that. You're going to be focusing on that, and that's the most common of hearing example. If it suddenly something becomes really loud, then you're automatically going to tune in on it because that's something that's sort of similar with sight when we're thinking about focusing on things that are closer to us and farther away from us. But there's a more conscious ability to look at something far away, even if we're automatically tuned to things that are close up. But for hearing, things that are close up or things that are louder, which most of the time correlates, we are automatically attuned into that, and it's really hard to focus on anything else. If you're just hearing a bunch of really calm background noise, that's not really forcing you to listen to it, and then you hear like a really loud grating screech of like a drill slamming into the ground, then you're automatically going to pick up the drill that's going on.
There's got to be something else going on in terms of what our consciousness focuses on, and it seems like it almost has something to do with meaning, like relevance.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden, like there's some sounds that all of a sudden like, oh, that's important or that's meaningful, and then all of a sudden your whole your this focus, this processing part, this double processing part, right, of consciousness.
Yeah.
It almost kind of like changes. It's like, I'm not processing this information anymore. I'm going to start processing this information.
Yeah, it's automatic. It's like your brain knows how much processing power it is, and so it figures out this is the most important thing, and it figures out how to tune in on that automatically.
Yeah, and this tuning in is really just starts processing that information in a different way.
Yeah.
Right? There's something that happens. And that's kind of what we're trying to get at.
Yeah. When you're feeling something, when you're hearing something unconsciously and you're not focusing on it, then it fades into the background in a way that's similar to sight, but also very different. Because I would say that almost when you're seeing something and even when you're unconsciously seeing something, you're more consciously processing it than if you're hearing something in the background. Because when you're hearing something, it almost goes away entirely. You almost forget what's going on. It's like when there's the constant drone of like an AC that's like going on, or like a generator or electricity, then it becomes so normal to your brain and so irrelevant that it literally completely disappears.
It literally disappears.
You literally cannot hear it at all.
We have a word for that. Background noise.
Yeah.
We don't talk about background sight.
No.
Right? Oh, that was just my background sight.
Nah. And then like it becomes so normal that the only way to process it is if it turns off. So if something changes to stop it.
So, on some sense, you would say that sound is more often unconscious than sight is.
Yeah, I would say that.
And what's it feel like when sound goes from unconscious to conscious? Like, let's even go take a rattler example. Like, let's say you're asleep.
Yeah, I would say that it's jarring in a way that's similar to sight is, when the adjustment is going on. When you have to like think for a second, your brain has to focus for a second on what's happening in that. Like for a second, you're not even able to fully process the information. Like if you're trying to tune into what's going on, or like you're suddenly jolted awake, then for a second, it's like the sound almost doesn't even register with you as what it really is. It takes you a second for your brain to be like, okay, we're in hearing mode now, and then to really process it.
Well, and what you just said in describing that, I think, says something important about consciousness. It's not It's not instant.
No.
Right? It's like it is a processing. Do you know what I mean? It's like got to end the information flow, got to end the meaning chain on this particular thing, and I got to switch it over to this. People don't talk about consciousness at that detailed level.
No. It's like they talk about it in a more, and not that it's unnatural, because it's very natural, but they talk about it in a natural way where it's almost like if it's not constantly on, then it's like really easy for it to be on. But when it's not really special, it's just similar to anything else. It's like it's just as easy to be unconscious as to be conscious, and you need that sort of shift either way. We hope that you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please consider checking out the next one in the series.
Or some of our other series on philosophy and life.
We upload videos every Friday, so don't forget to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. See you next week.